I used to think that comfort meant belonging. If something felt familiar, if it was predictable, if it didn't demand much from me, I assumed it must be right. I assumed that ease was a sign of fit. That if I wasn't resisting, if I wasn't uncomfortable, if nothing inside me was pushing back, then I must have been where I belonged. That belief shaped more of my life than I realized. I chose places that felt comfortable, routines that felt manageable, people I didn't have to explain myself to. I told myself that this was maturity, that this was what stability felt like. And for a long time I didn't question it. Comfort is persuasive. It doesn't argue. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't ask you to justify anything. It simply allows you to stay. And staying feels safe. I mistook that safety for belonging. Belonging, I thought, was the absence of friction. It was the feeling of settling in, of no longer needing to adjust, of being able to exhale and say, "This is fine." And in many ways, it was fine. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was missing in an obvious way. But something was absent, not pain, not dissatisfaction. Depth. I didn't feel misplaced. I felt accommodated. There's a difference. Being accommodated means you fit without needing to change much. Belonging means you are engaged even when it's uncomfortable. I didn't notice that distinction at first. Comfort felt like a reward. After years of effort, of adaptation, of learning how to function, comfort felt earned. Why would I question it? Why would I disrupt something that didn't cause problems? I told myself that discomfort was a sign of misalignment. That if something challenged me, it probably wasn't meant for me. So I learned to avoid it. I learned to stay where things were smooth, where expectations were clear, where I knew my role. That choice reduced anxiety. It reduced uncertainty. It made life easier to manage, but it also reduced something else. Presence. I didn't feel fully absent. I felt partially involved, like I was showing up but not entirely arriving. I realized later that comfort had allowed me to stop listening. When everything feels manageable, you stop checking in. You assume that the absence of tension means the presence of truth. But comfort can be neutral. It doesn't necessarily tell you whether something is right. It only tells you that you've learned how to exist within it. I stayed in situations that didn't ask anything new of me. I stayed in roles that didn't require growth or honesty. I stayed because it was easy to remain. And I told myself that ease meant alignment. I confused familiarity with belonging. Familiarity feels warm. It feels predictable. It feels known. Belonging feels alive. It involves response. It involves participation. It involves moments where you don't know exactly how you fit, but you stay engaged anyway. I hadn't felt that in a long time. Not because it was unavailable, but because I had trained myself to prioritize comfort over engagement. I realized that I was choosing what required the least adjustment from me. And adjustment is where presence lives. I didn't notice how passive I had become. I wasn't disengaged, but I wasn't invested either. I was comfortable enough to stop asking questions. Comfort made everything feel settled, even when nothing had been examined. I assumed that belonging meant not needing to push, but real belonging often involves friction, not conflict, not struggle, but movement. It asks you to respond, to participate, to adjust and be adjusted. Comfort asks nothing. It simply holds you in place. I began to notice how often I described my life as fine, not good, not meaningful, not fulfilling. Fine. Fine became my default answer, and fine felt responsible. It didn't raise alarms. It didn't invite concern. It didn't require explanation. But fine also didn't invite depth. It didn't invite curiosity. It didn't invite honesty. I realized that I had been using comfort as a way to avoid uncertainty. I told myself that belonging should feel natural, effortless. But what I was really avoiding was vulnerability, because vulnerability disrupts comfort. It asks you to feel, to risk, to be seen in ways that can't be controlled. Comfort allowed me to remain protected. I didn't have to expose uncertainty. I didn't have to admit doubt. I didn't have to acknowledge that something wasn't fully alive. I stayed comfortable because it allowed me to remain intact. But intact isn't the same as present. I started to see that comfort had become a kind of boundary, a line I didn't cross. Anything that challenged it, I labeled as unnecessary. Anything that unsettled it, I postponed. I had convinced myself that peace meant stillness, that belonging meant ease. But stillness can become stagnation when it's not chosen. Consciously, I wasn't choosing comfort, I was defaulting to it. That's when the confusion became clear. Comfort had replaced belonging because it was easier to maintain. Belonging requires participation. Comfort only requires continuation. I didn't feel rejected by my life. I felt buffered, shielded from discomfort, shielded from intensity, shielded from the parts of myself that didn't fit neatly. I wasn't unhappy. I was underengaged. And that's harder to recognize. There's no signal, no clear pain, just a subtle sense that you're not fully inside what you're living. I realized that belonging often includes moments where you feel unsure, where you don't immediately know what's expected of you, where you have to show up without guarantees. Comfort removes those moments. It replaces them with routine. And routine can feel like belonging if you've been there long enough. I had stayed long enough that familiarity felt like ownership, but ownership without engagement is just occupancy. I was occupying my life, not inhabiting it. That realization didn't make me want to leave everything. It made me want to notice where I had mistaken ease for truth, where I had stayed not because something felt alive, but because it didn't ask anything of me. I didn't reject comfort after that. I stopped confusing it with belonging. Comfort is useful. It provides rest. It provides stability. But belonging does something different. It invites response. It invites presence, even when that presence is quiet. I began to notice when something felt merely comfortable versus when it felt involving. The difference was subtle. Comfort felt smooth. Involving felt attentive. Comfort allowed me to disappear a little. Belonging asked me to be there. I didn't need to seek discomfort to find belonging. I just needed to stop avoiding engagement. That shift didn't change my circumstances. It changed how I participated in them. I stopped assuming that if something felt easy, it must be right. I allowed myself to stay curious, even when nothing was wrong. I realized that belonging is not about how little something asks of you. It's about how present you are when you're there. I had confused comfort with belonging because comfort was easier to define. Belonging is quieter, harder to measure, harder to explain. But once you feel the difference, you can't unsee it. Comfort is passive. Belonging is responsive. I had been choosing the first, thinking it was the second, and realizing that didn't create urgency. It created clarity. I didn't need to leave comfort behind. I just needed to stop letting it decide for me.